Hi there, good morning and welcome to this webinar. My name's Andrew Watson. I'm going to be running the webinar this morning, Introduction to Public Sector Tendering. I'm the bid consultancy and training manager here at Proactive's Tenders Direct, and my job's all around about helping businesses be as successful as possible with their public sector tendering. So it's an introductory webinar this morning, so I think a lot of you will be relatively new into looking at public sector tendering and seeing if getting access and winning work in the public sector is a viable route for your organisation. Hopefully across the next sort of 30 to 45 minutes, I can help you to understand a little bit of the landscape that you might be working in if you do go for this route, help you understand some of the terminology, which isn't always that straightforward, and give you some food for thought about what next steps might be to continue your journey and be as successful as possible. There's absolutely loads of folk have registered for the webinar, and people are joining all the time. There's a really big group on the line as well, so thank you very much for your attendance. We've got some slides to run through. Obviously, the session will be recorded, and you'll be sent a link to it afterwards, so you will be able to go back and review maybe at your own leisure as well, if there's anything that maybe you think that I could do with a second glance. There is the option to ask questions within the chat function. So if there are any questions that you really want to answer relating to this sort of fairly broad topic, then just punch them in the chat. I'll see if we get the opportunity to kind of pause and look at some of those questions as we go through. But if not, then I'll certainly spend some time towards the end of the session going over some live questions, depending on what ones and how many we get in, and also review some of the more kind of popular or sort of typical questions that we got asked, when you registered for the webinar as well. After the end of the webinar, certainly if you want to carry on the conversation and me to speak a bit more, then I'll leave contact details and make sure you've got the option to reach out to me, so we can make sure you're feeling covered and supported kind of going forward. So enough preamble, let's get into it. So let me just spin through the objectives really, and it is introductory, and obviously it's quite a lot of ground to cover in terms of public sector and the tendering process that covers that, but we'll try and sort of set the agenda piece so on. So in terms of across this webinar, we're going to look at, well, what is it, who are public sector buyers? What does it mean when we talk about the public sector, and actually what is it that they purchase? When they're doing so, what's the legislation governing that procurement process within the UK? And in terms of the legislation governing it, how does that then feed into particular procurement procedures and the various different stages? So they're really exciting terminology stuff that comes from it, and understanding a little bit about the process. But once we've got that foundation about the understanding, then it's going to be easier to kind of get access to it and actually start to make some headway within this. We'll also talk about, well, actually, how do I get started with actually public sector tendering? And it's a Monday morning, guys. It's Monday morning. It's time for some generosity, so we'll be throwing in some top tips around that as well. Typically, for anyone that normally attends our webinars, typically we do them on a Wednesday kind of lunchtime or a Thursday lunchtime. But there is some research that says people's attention actually and their happiness to come on things like this could potentially be a little bit higher on a Monday morning, believe it or not. So here we are. We'll give it a go, and you guys can feedback and let me know if that was a wise decision or not come the end of it, or in your feedback. Okay, so in terms of, let's set the scene, make sure everyone's clear on what we're talking about. So let's say, who are public sector buyers, and actually what is it that they purchase? It seems like a simple question, but it's also a fairly enormous one, and to be totally honest, it's actually a little bit complicated as well. I always say with these type of relatively introductory type webinars that we do, the important thing to remember is what we don't have to be to participate in this and to get involved is we don't have to be experts in public sector procurement. We just need to understand that there's a an environment within which the public sector exists, and the people within those organisations, they'll know that they're a public sector body, they'll know what rules and regulations are going to apply to them, and broadly speaking, with the odd exception, they will run their procurement in a compliant and orderly fashion. And we need to be understanding, kind of who they are, what they do, but really what then are our obligations, or what is it we need to be doing kind of as our part as potential suppliers within that process. Okay. So we don't need to come away being experts and being able to go away and run a procurement exercise for a public sector body. We just need to be undaunted by some of the terminology and understand, well, what will that mean for us as a potential supplier? So that's kind of what we're looking to set the groundwork for today. So hopefully that makes sense. In terms of actually who are public sector buyers? So in a broad sweep, they're organisations who spend taxpayers' money. So what does that include? Well, you'll know obviously there's lots of different central government departments. So Department of Justice, Department of Ministry of Defence, whatever it might be. So all of these central government departments are all spending taxpayers' money, and they're all part of the public sector. Equally likely, or maybe more likely in some of your cases, if your services are kind of some geographic specific, then you're maybe going to come across more sort of local bodies. So local councils all up and down the country are all part of the public sector. So you'll be located wherever your business is within the UK, or in other countries there will be a local council of some variety or other that's where you sit. And they have, obviously got to procure a wide range of goods and services. Okay. Things like emergency services are obviously maybe into not necessarily as clear, but they would also fall under the public sector umbrella, as would lots of different schools, colleges and universities. Schools can obviously be a little bit different in terms of whether or not they're classified as public sector based on what type of school it is, etc. But broadly speaking, lots of schools, colleges and universities do fall under the public sector, and therefore they are bound to follow the same sort of procurement rules and regulations as other public sector bodies. NHS trusts and CCGs also fall under the public sector, therefore they've got to go through the same process. And generally the kind of catch-all bodies that are publicly funded, obviously a very well-known example of that would be the BBC. So anything like that would all fall under sort of public sector, and therefore they're obligated to follow public sector rules for buying, for procurement. Okay. In terms of what is it? Excuse me, I have a cold, but I was hoping I might just be like fully recovered for this webinar, but I'm just maybe just going to have a little bit of a croak in my throat as the webinar progresses. So bear with me. In terms of what is it that they actually buy? Well, we're talking about three broad categories, and the reason they're split up into three broad categories is it has a bit of an impact on how that process then works and what regulations apply to them. Let's check this. CCG, someone asked what CCGs are. So clinical commissioning group. So it's sort of basically a part of NHS. So it covers within NHS. So you'll sometimes see that they're responsible for undertaking procurement exercises within the NHS. But perfectly fine to ask the question. Do keep them coming in. But that was just a question that got asked. But obviously, guys, just fire in the questions. I might not get them all live, but we'll try and spend some time towards the end as well. But do feel free to fire them in at any point using the questions in the chat function. So within the public sector, what do they buy? And if you think about all of the things that any given organisation within the public sector will need, they'll need all of the stuff relating to the sort of day-to-day running of a department or of an organisation, plus the things relating to specifically the type of services that they provide as well. Okay, so we can think about it in terms of all of this different stuff. It's all things that they're going to have to procure, i.e. they're going to have to buy. So broad three categories: supplies, which means sort of physical things, so goods or products. And if you think about how wide a range that could be, an example there is, and we just talked about NHS stuff, so they're obviously going to be, NHS bodies are going to be buying, will have a requirement for lots and lots of varying different array of medical equipment, but then any organisation, any public sector organisation is going to have a requirement for stationery, for example. So they're going to have to procure that. So very mundane things. If it's a local council and they've got, they're going to have people that are office based. They're going to need all of the things that you're going to need around having people in an office. They're going to need IT equipment, for example. They're going to need office furniture, just as a one example. Second category is services. So services, so that's basically when it's not sort of physical goods, okay, when it's things that you're providing as a service rather than as a good. So for example, we talked about local authorities will have offices, but to have people work in offices, they're going to need services. The offices are going to need facilities management services that might be outsourced. They're going to need IT services. They're going to need lots of services around having a computer system and networks in place. They're maybe going to need catering, etc., security. So all of the things that aren't physical goods that people are also needing to buy fall under the umbrella category of services. Slightly different, there's also works, and we'll explain in a little bit kind of why this is a separate category, but works broadly talks about is things that are related to the construction industry, okay? So anything related to sites and building and renovations and demolitions, that stuff, that all comes under works. And the reason that's done separately is because the values involved tend to be really quite high in comparison to other services. Therefore, the thresholds when you've got to start running the procurement in a particular way are different for items that fall under this broad like works category, which relates to construction. Again, you don't have to be assigning the procurement into one of these groups, because the authority that's procuring things will know. They will know what the appropriate group for it to sit in is, and then they'll know what regulations apply to it based on which group it sits in. But it's just to give you an understanding when you see these terminology being banded around, and we'll build on this just in a little bit as well. So in terms of what's this sort of landscape, how does it work? So there's various pieces of legislation in place that govern how public sector bodies do their procurements within the UK. Okay, so there's a legislation that determines kind of how that works and how it runs. We'll explain that in a little bit more of a second. Again, they'll have the visibility and the awareness of what the legislation is. There are quite a lot of things moving through Parliament just now, so various different stages, where there are going to be potentially in the next sort of year or two various further changes to how public sector procurement is done within the UK, but a lot of the details around that are still to emerge. The broad idea is to make it more open, make it more accessible, make it more transparent, make it more a viable route for small and medium enterprises to get involved with. So it should all be positive change for the vast majority of you, but the actual meat and bones detail of what those will look like, what those changes will look like, and how that will filter down into actually how people behave and what's required of them and so on, that type of detail is still actually being worked out as the new legislation is working its way through. For the moment, we have PCR 2015, which is the public contracts regulation that do govern a lot of what we do, a lot of how the public sector bodies have to behave. Broad kind of headline information from it. Basically, there is a requirement for any public sector body where they are running a formal procurement that they are expected or required to basically to post, so to advertise that opportunity, so that they are readily available and visible for any relevant body or any relevant organisation that wants to look for those opportunities. Okay, we'll talk about this more in a bit of a second, but there's there's two kind of government platforms, certainly UK wide, although in Scotland and Wales there are additional ones, but UK wide there is Contracts Finder and there is Find a Tender. So there's two different ones. Contracts Finder is for what we call low value notices, and Find a Tender is for high value notices, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But these two government websites are where any notice for a public sector procurement is supposed to get pushed, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. What you're always going to find, or what there should always be, is there should be set time limits for when you've got to get responses in. It should say how and to whom and through what vehicle you need to respond. So how you go about doing a response for you to be able to be considered, and really what the requirements are for you as a potential supplier to be able to participate. Okay, so the idea is that any contract notice, anytime someone in the public sector is looking to procure something, that is advertised and you can see what that opportunity is, and you can make an assessment based on the documentation that they provide as to whether or not that's something that as a business you would be interested in pursuing or actually potentially being a supplier for. So it's supposed to be that you'll be able to interrogate some information that they provide, and then you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to pursue that opportunity. They are also, as part of the process, required to publish an awards notice. So basically within 30 days of an award of someone being a supplier or suppliers being awarded the work, then they're supposed to publish kind of the information, so it's public record as to who it is that's won that, when the contract's going to start, what the contract is, and whether it's a SME or VCSE who has won the work as well. Okay, so the idea is if you are successful and you do win work within the public sector, that becomes public, part of the public record to say that organisation, that yourselves have won that, and other people have visibility to see that you've won that work as well. Okay, it does mean that if you have things like if you want to check on for example who's kind of won particular contracts, then that's all public record and can be found. Okay, so you can see, well, who's won a contract with this organisation in this type of goods or services. Someone's just asked the question, where do they publish the award notices? So the award notice should be published in the same place that the contract notice was published, if that makes sense. So it's a Contracts Finder contract notice, then the awards notice should be published there likewise, and Find a Tender, if the contract notice is published there, then the contract award notice should be published there also. So you should be able to basically pair them up. You should be able to get a matching pair that you should always be able to do. Okay, again, guys, it's good to have this as an understanding, but remember, we're not needing to come away from this webinar as experts in public sector procurement. We just need to understand, some of the terminology. Whoever's running the procurement within the public sector body will know what thresholds apply to them and how they've got to run the procurement as a result of that. But just broadly, remember at the start of the webinar, we talked about there being sort of central government bodies and then lots of non-central government bodies, which is sort of sub-central government bodies. So there are different, we call them thresholds, that apply based on whether it's a central government department or whether it's like, for example, a local authority is a sub-central one. So they have different thresholds which make it a high value, or below that a low value contract. Okay, so you can see that for central government, for services and supplies, it's just under 139,000, and above that it becomes a high value, and that's for the total contract value for any given work, with including any potential extension periods in the contract. You can see that for sub-central government authorities, it's 213,500 is the point at which it becomes a high value rather than a low value. Okay, and remembering this is that the high value ones go to the Find a Tender government portal, and the low value ones go on Contracts Finder. Okay, we talked about for for works, so that's the construction one, where you can see the limit is just over 5.3 million. So it's much higher for works because the costs involved in construction tend to be so high. It's a much higher threshold before it becomes a quote unquote high value tender. So our tenders published. So I said there was a cut-off I just explained between the sort of high and low value. So when you're talking about a low value one, what does that mean in terms of, does that mean anything that's below that value still has to be formally published? Well, no. So for central government bodies, they have to do a tender process for anything with a total value over £12,000, and for local governments, it's over £30,000. Okay, so any contract that's worth over £30,000 for a local government body, non-central body, is going to go through a formal tender process, okay, where all of this stuff will apply. Okay, as I said, the distinction between low value ones should be able to find on Contracts Finder, and high value ones should be able to find on the Find a Tender website, both of those government websites. Okay. Okay, very quickly, having a spin through procurement procedures and the associated tendering stages. There are a number of different procedures that apply. Certainly when you're starting out early on, nearly all, if not all, of the ones that you're going to come across are either going to be either open procedures or restricted procedures. Open or restricted. There are other ones relating to sort of negotiated ones, etc., but they tend to be for large scale complex procurements with lots of stages and kind of discussion and so on. I think it's unlikely for introductions to a stage organizations that you're going to be involved in anything other than the two that are on the screen. Most typically, and for all low value procurements, you're going to see an open procedure being used, where they're going to have all of the details available to you. Anyone can submit a tender, and they're going to evaluate whether or not you're suitable as an organization and the quality of your solution. Basically at the same time, you're going to submit responses to allow them to do those two parts at the same time. And typically you get 30 days to do a response. In a restricted procedure, which you will come across, they're more heavily used in certain types of procurement than others, i.e. within certain sectors based on what it is that you supply. But you might see restricted procedures. All it means is that the first stage, all you do is you provide the information about what you do as an organization, where you are, what your experience is, etc. And then they evaluate your suitability to be carried forward off the back of that. And it's only if you pass that stage that you then have another window to complete your responses to say how would you go about meeting the requirements of the specifications for the actual contract. So in a restricted procedure, you do one submission about what you are as a company and what you've done up to that point. If you are successful, you basically get another 30-day window to then put forward your responses to how you plan on delivering the services or goods that are required. Okay, so it's a two-stage process in a restricted procedure rather than a one-stage in an open procedure. But you'll see on the contract notice, when you're looking at any opportunities, it will clearly state what the procedure type is. If it says anything other than open or restricted, it could be that you do want some guidance or support if there's not anyone within the organisation that's used to going through those other types. But 90–95% of the time, you're going to see it as being open or restricted. And like I say, if it's a low value contract notice, it will always be an open procedure. Just some other terminology to be aware of when you're looking at contract notices. I've had it in the past where people have gone, oh, I really want to go for this one. And actually what the notice is it's not a contract notice. It is a prior information notice, otherwise a PIN, which can be for a couple of different things, but typically a PIN is just to let you know as a marketplace that this buyer is shortly to launch a procurement activity, to give you a heads up that they're going to be looking for responses and they are looking to procure within a reasonably short time frame. They can also ask for information back from you, so it can be a kind of market testing type notice. So they can say, what do you want to, we want to understand a bit more from a supplier point of view, what you're looking for, etc. And then they might use that to actually, when they get a range of responses, use that to sense check what they're planning on procuring. But typically, PINs, prior information notices, are not the start of it. They can be on occasion, but typically they're not the start of a formal procurement process. But if you read the description whenever you see them, it will be clear kind of what the purpose of the PIN is and what your responsibilities in relation to it therefore are. You'll also hear people talking about CANs or contract award notices. This is just as it sort of states, it's fairly self-explanatory. I talked about how it becomes public record when an organisation has won work. Contract award notice is the vehicle by which that happens. So when it's published, contracts are awarded. You will then be able to see, who the buyer is, when the contract's due to start, what the value is, etc. So all that record becomes publicly available, and it's through this mechanism of the contract award notice that does so. Okay. Just a couple of very quick terminology tips, because people can get a little bit concerned about it. And we've talked about high and low value thresholds. So the key ones are in the slide deck, but that main one, 213,500 for supply and services, it becomes high value. Over that, it's a different threshold for works contracts. You will see in the contract notices, and you may hear people talk about CPV codes, which is common procurement vocabulary. What this basically means is a way of assigning categories or assigning what it is that's being procured, in a categorized way against a coded system to say, okay, well, these are all the codes that would apply to this one, given the scope of the work that's involved in it. They're certainly not sort of a perfect approach to doing it, because you do get some kind of erroneous ones that flag up as being related to something that actually this is not really what the tender is about, but it is a kind of sort of set way of looking at what actually the procurement is looking to procure. You'll see the terms in tender documents of either MEET or MAT, so most economically advantageous tender, or becoming more common now, just most advantageous tender. The first one, MEET, is a little bit misleading because it makes it sound like it's purely a sort of financially driven decision. So typically the supplier that secures work is the one that has the quote-unquote best submission. The criteria for determining the best submission, high scoring submission, is always laid out, and it varies. It's going to be a combination typically of the cost component within their submission and the quality component within their submission, which is what they plan on doing, how well have they articulated the design of their solution. How those two different components interact and how they're weighted is determined by the buyer, and they do vary from tender to tender, but it will be clear what the criteria overall is and how to achieve the marks within those, and then they will be able to say, well, who's scored highest, therefore that's the one that's going to be successful. That is actually what they mean when they say most economically advantageous tender. It sounds like it would be the most cost effective, i.e. the cheapest, but that's actually not what it means. And in a drive to get people to think about, make sure everyone's aware that it's a broad picture we're talking about and not just a kind of cost cutting exercise, we're typically being referred to more as most advantageous tender, or MAT, rather than MEET. Again, don't get too hung up. Look at the tender documents, understand that there's a mechanism through which they're scoring. What does that mean for my organization based on how I can respond to these? How competitive am I typically on price? How big a component of the scoring is that? How confident am I in the quality of the solution I can put forward, and therefore my quality scores, etc. You'll see different terminologies for the actual tender documentation, for the piece that's triggering you to respond. You'll see RFQ, which is request for quote, RFP, which is request for proposal, and ITT, invitation to tender. So these are the documents saying to you as a potential supplier that the buyer has published, hey, here you are, have a look at this. This is what I'm looking for. Here's your opportunity to respond to it. Okay. So you'll see different, but it's basically, those things all mean similar. They're all looking for you to provide information which they're determining really what information they're looking for, and you've got to respond to that fully and comprehensively to have a chance of being appointed as a successful supplier. You'll also hear the terms in the last section, PQQ, SPD, and the current one that's most applicable across certainly England is SQ, which stands for Selection Questionnaire. PQQ is Pre-Qualification Questionnaire, and SPD is Single Procurement Document, which used to be ESPD, which was European Single Procurement Document. All these are ways, you only ever see one of these used within any given tender, depending on who's running it and which part of the UK it's based in. But basically what it is it's a standard-ish form that you have to complete, and it's doing that part of for you to complete for them to understand the details of where your company is just now and the work that you have done thus far. Okay, so it's a way of them understanding the snapshot of your company and your history. It's a combination of very sort of boring administrative information that you'll need to provide to them, as well as some information about things like previous contracts, qualifications, accreditations, etc. So it's to give them a picture of where are you as a company, and let's just double check that as an organization you have the right prerequisites and you are actually suitable to be considered for this work. Once you get, and they'll assess against that. If you get through that stage, that's when they would get in to start actually evaluating what your proposal looks like, i.e. how you are going to and what you are going to do to meet the specification requirements that they've laid out within their documents. If you can't provide the information that provides them with confidence as it stands now as a business, that you are a suitable entity to undertake this work based on what you've done now and what you've done in the past, then you won't be considered. Your solution, even if it was fabulous, you wouldn't be considered for the opportunity. They have to be confident that you're an appropriate organisation to undertake the work based on what you do now and what you've done in the past for you to be considered. So it's an important point. Okay. So lots of terminology. Guys, if you're new and you're feeling like this is quite a lot and you're covering quite a lot of ground, we are sort of scratching the surface, but we are going at a little bit of a pace as well. It probably won't surprise you, I am pretty good at overrunning versus time, but never mind, we've still got some time left and there's some tips and some things to get you started and think about what are my next steps. If you are feeling like this was a lot of terminology, remember you're going to get access to these slides and you can review that recording at your own leisure, so you're going to get a chance to review especially some of the terminology. So don't worry if it seems like a lot to take in, you're going to get that opportunity to review it again. But let's for the remainder look at things like, well, how do I translate this into getting started within the public sector? First and foremost, we need to see if we can find some opportunities we think might be suitable. We've talked about the government platforms that are able to sort of aggregate the opportunities. I will say that there is a little bit of an issue in that the adherence from public sector bodies to push their contract notices to Contracts Finder, where the low value ones go, is typically only around about 50%. So it captures about 50% of the opportunities that should be there. If you want to see a sort of full market visibility, at the moment, that means actually having a subscription service to someone that's going to aggregate and categorize and push relevant opportunities to you. Ourselves, Proactus, through our tenders direct service, that is the market leading service, and I'll send you links at the end, or bring up some links at the end, but you can go on our website and sign up for a 7 full access free day trial, so you can see all of the opportunities that are relevant for you. Even if you have no intention of signing up to us, it's still a great activity to do, because you're going to be able to see what's there, you're going to be able to see the scale of the market, etc. When we find opportunities, we need to then be a bit careful about are there things that we want to go for? How do we decide what they are and what they might look like? Really simple criteria to be able to give ourselves a thumbs up about something. Can we meet the requirements? Can we meet the requirements of what they're looking for organizations in terms of where we are now? Can we meet the requirements in terms of what they're looking for as a solution? Would we want to win this work? often there'll be a contract value, a cap on the contract value imposed on any given contract. Can we win the work? Is this aligned to what we want to do, what we want to be doing going forward? If we win it, do we actually have the resources to deliver this? We don't want to go and pursue stuff and secure it to then realize that we don't have the resources, the capability, the manpower, the expertise to actually deliver this. It's going to damage our reputation. We're going to get in all sorts of things. So we need to be in a position to deliver if we were to win it. The time frame for starting the contract, for mobilizing, for actually being up and running will always be kind of captured within the documentation you get to review. Is it realistic for us as a business? And also, is it realistic in terms of, can we win? Do we know that there are 20 other companies that are better positioned to deliver this solution that the public sector body buyer is looking for? Or we know we've got a really strong case because this is really, it's right up the sort of detail work that we do, and we know we have a really strong reputation and history in the delivery of that type of work. Therefore, we do have a really strong shot at winning it. Let's try and make sure we're pursuing relevant and high potential opportunities. So just simple questions to ask at the start of the process. In terms of how we go about winning, really simple things then, guys. We need to be ready to tender. So when we're looking at opportunities, are a lot of opportunities, are they asking for things that that we don't have in place already? Do we need to take action to get things in place? Are there particular accreditations or certifications or processes or policies that we need to have in place that we don't just now, that we need to get in place to be a relevant bidder? So dependent on the type of work that you do, you might know, for example, that there's particular certifications that are kind of critical for you to be bidding for things. Do you know what those are, and do you have them in place, or have you got an action plan to get those in place? Do we understand how to bid? So if we reviewed the documents in detail and understand what our obligations are. I know, again, for some of you, if you're new, but remembering that the documents for any given opportunity are going to lay out end to end what the requirements of you are as a supplier. Sometimes they're a lot more easy to follow than others, but the detail all should be there. And if it's not, you can ask a question to understand what's missing. But typically it should be there, but we need to have read and understood and be familiar with the process to then be able to put a bid in. If we want to be successful, we really need to have an understanding at some level of who our competitors are, what their strengths might be, what their weaknesses might be, even if it's at an aggregated level. We're talking about the types of competitors we might come up against. It's always going to be a competitive process. It's going to vary in terms of how competitive, how many other bidders there are, but how confident are we that our offering is better than other people's? If we don't have any idea what they offer, what they do, then that's impossible to have that kind of confidence, okay? The more we know our buyers in terms of what's important to them, what they're looking for, what they want to see, what are their kind of hot button issues, the more we know those things about an individual buyer, the better a chance we have of being successful. So if we want to win, we need to spend the time, ideally, have an existing relationship with them, build that up before tenders come out, or do that kind of research with them, research on them to understand what's important to them, how we can align closely to that. Okay, very whistle stop tour through some basic tips and so on. What I'll also do is have a look and see what kind of live questions we've got as well. Let me see if we've had any questions, guys. If you do have questions, it's a kind of great time to punch them in now. Let me see. See if I can find some questions. When getting on Proactis portal for tender details, why occasionally will it not say authorized to view this page? That may be a question I'm not entirely sure I understand. So you typically have to be, when you're going and looking at the individual response, an individual opportunity, typically, not always, but usually you have to be logged into the individual portal to be able to do that. You need to let me know for this one. If you want to punch in the chat, we can pick up afterwards. But if there's a specific, which specific portal you're getting that message, but it sounds just like a kind of, if you're logged in and you're getting that message, that sounds just like a kind of portal error. So whichever platform it is, the portal, sort of IT support desk should be able to fix that for you. What is the public sector's view on outsourcing portions of work to offshore locations, custom software development services in particular? Is this view the same for all potential buyers? It's a good question. It's quite a big question. It's not that it never happens. I think you need to be really clear on what the requirements are and what restrictions they've placed on doing it are as well. If it's not clear from the documentation that's been published whether or not that would be a viable option to do, then you can ask those questions through the clarification as to whether or not that would be deemed acceptable. Obviously, there's things like data protection, data privacy, GDPR, etc. How that's all going to be managed, where that's all going to be managed from, that can have a bearing. But there's not like an absolute answer one way or another. It would be case by case, look at what the documents say, and then if it's still not clear, then you need to raise clarifications within the procurement. But it's not to say that it never does happen, but you need to be clear on each individual opportunity, whether it's something that would be suitable or not. How can we find out which public sector buyers are in purchasing groups, purchasing portals, i.e. collective procurement? Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I'm not sure there's a sort of set way to find out where all of them are. What you can do certainly is have a look at if there's particular frameworks that are going to be relevant for the type of goods or services that you provide. What you'll notice is that certain frameworks are set up as sort of national frameworks, and what you'll also see is when those are, it will say the list of prospective organisations that have sort of signed up to use those frameworks as well, or potentially use those frameworks. So you do get some frameworks that are, for example, UK wide, and you'll see a list of several dozen organisations that are public sector organisations that are kind of linked to that. I do have the option of using that procurement to run exercises. There's not like necessarily one place to find them all. It would be more looking at, okay, well, I need to do a search on what are the, based on the categories of opportunities, what are the sort of things that I would be interested in selling into the public sector, and then what over X number of years, what frameworks have been published against those, and then looking at within the contract notice for those frameworks to see which organisations are using those frameworks. So there's not a sort of straightforward way to do it. You said sort of purchasing groups / purchasing portals. The portals, just to be clear, there's the government ones, which are kind of advertising and sort of capturing, all the ones that different authorities are publishing. The portal that actually the procurement is being run through, there are a number of different ones of those, because that's actually the authority has paid to get access to a platform for them to compliantly run their procurement through. So Proactus as a group, we run several ones. So for example, ProContract is quite widely used. It's one of the biggest ones. So there's lots of public sector bodies within the UK that use ProContract as the mechanism for running their procurement for any given procurement. They will run through that, use that portal to run it through. Okay, so the portal that they use is based on which company is supplying that system for them to run their procurement through. Okay, and in addition to Proactus, there are a number of other companies within the UK that offer a portal for a government authority to run their procurement through. So you'll see a number of different ones, but it's not to say that everyone that uses ProContract are linked. They're not. So the authority will have a standalone access to use ProContract, and a different authority will have a different sort of standalone access, but it all gets captured under ProContract. Okay, so they're not part of a collective, but they would still be using the same purchasing portal. I'm conscious that this level of detail might be a little bit baffling for quite a lot of folk, given the nature of the topic. Don't be too concerned about it, guys. If you are looking at the contract notice on the government website, or you're a Tenders Direct subscriber, or you're on our trial, there will always be a hyperlink through to the portal that's actually hosting the procurement. When you click on that and you've not been on it before, you have to register your details, but that's always free and relatively quick to do. And then you can get access to all of the documents within that opportunity, and you can do that full examination to see its suitability. Okay. Really great questions. I'll try and have a spin through. I'll try and have a spin through kind of after the webinar. I'm conscious of time. There's absolutely loads of questions. So let me just kind of conclude. I won't do any of the other questions. So just in terms of resources, I've talked about it. If you want to see the full market picture for what are the relevant opportunities within the public sector, both current ones and what's been in the past number of years, if you go into Tenders Direct, you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. I know there will be some people on the call as well that are already subscribers, so thank you for your continued support. But if you're not, then go on the website, sign up for the trial, no obligation, you get full access, and you can get a real feel for what opportunities there are within public sector. We've got free resources on our website. The webinars are all free to access, and I said you will get a link to this one as well. And there's also links to our training courses, which are really, really good as well. We run them sort of online remotely with a trainer, and we're also going to be starting face-to-face training again as well in the summertime. So great stuff there, and I would highly encourage you to come on board and look and see if there's a suitable one for yourself. Put the telephone number and our email up on the screen there as well. So if you do want to reach out, you certainly can do. Let me just see if I can manage to get my text going to work. What I've also done, guys, is in the chat function, I've just dropped a link that will take you into it's a bookings link for our calendar, our team's calendar. So you can go in there, and actually, if you do want to book a session, everyone's very welcome. Anyone that's been on this call, if you want to come on and book a session with myself or anyone in the team, you can do so. It's totally free. It'll be a half-hour session. You can book on and then discuss anything in a bit more detail to give you a bit more comfort, or if you've got need a little bit more information on anything that we've covered, you want to book a session with us, just pop on there, and you can do, and we can carry on the conversation there. We will send out some requests and give you guys a contact, just asking for some feedback on the webinar. I hope you're able to take something valuable from it. Like I say, you'll get the slides and a link to review, or a recording and a link to review in the coming days. Anything else you need, drop us an email on that line, or do feel free to book in a meeting with myself or the team, and we can carry on the conversation there. Really hope this served as a good introduction for you all. Really thankful for you to take the time out on this Monday morning, not Thursday or Wednesday lunchtime, to join me, and wishing you a really pleasant rest of day and rest of week. Thanks so much, and we'll hopefully see you at the next webinar too. Thanks again. Bye for now.